Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is March 18th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope everyone enjoyed their weekend, their St. Patrick's Day weekend. So glad to have you with me today. So a few stories we're going to touch on today. I do want to give you guys an update to the Brexit. And then I also want to talk about President Trump, some of his tweets. He was on a Twitter tweet storm this weekend. I don't know, some 40, 50, some odd tweets. A couple of them were not so pleasing to me, and I just want to voice that opinion and share that with you guys, and then give a follow-up to a couple of the shows from last week in regards to Lisa Page, the former FBI attorney, in her closed-door testimony, which obviously took place last year, but those documents, the transcription was just released, so I do want to follow up with that, and then if we have time, go into day 2 of her testimony and read to you a little bit of that transcript. So first, to our buddies across the pond, and what's going on with Brexit is another little twist in this plot that just keeps on going and going. So what we have now is, let's just set the stage and give you guys an update of where we stand. So we know that the Brexit deal back in January was shut down by Parliament in an historic vote. It was an historic defeat for any prime minister. That's pretty devastating. Then Theresa May, in the 11th hour, flew to Brussels to meet her counterparts in the EU to see if she could strike a last-minute deal that she could take back to the Parliament to see if she could get that through so that the UK could leave the EU with a deal in hand. Well, that took place last week, and that was shot down. So that's twice. It was a slightly different deal, and that's going to mean something in a minute, but it was a slightly different deal, but nevertheless, it got struck down as well. Although, in Prime Minister May's favor, the defeat was not as devastating as it was before. So that's put in place a chain of events. What then happened the subsequent day was Parliament had the chance to vote to shoot down a no-deal Brexit altogether, which they did. So, according to Parliament, at this juncture, they will not leave the EU without a deal. So there must be a deal in order to leave the EU. And remember, we're getting closer and closer to the March 29th deadline. Now, this also put in motion that previous vote to see if they wanted to vote to extend Article 50, which would potentially extend the March 29th vote. However, the EU, all 29 parties, have to agree to the extension. So if any one country wants to say, no, we're done, hit the road, Jack, we don't care, this is too much drama, we don't need it, then this whole thing could get very interesting, very interesting. But here's where the plot twist took place earlier today. This has to deal with the Speaker of the House in the UK Parliament, John Bercow, and he was asked by some members of Parliament to take a look to see if it makes any sense at all to vote on this deal once again for a third time. And remember last week I said that this may come up for a third vote, which, according to the schedule, was supposed to take place on March 20th, so only a couple of days from now. Here's the interesting thing. Because Parliament already voted on this very same deal, not slightly different like before, January to March was slightly different. Now, last week to March 20th is going to be the same exact deal. John Bercow, the Speaker of the House, says that Parliament already voted on this. So unless the deal changes, unless the government goes to Brussels or makes some sort of maneuver to make it an actual different deal, it's likely that he will not put it forward to an additional vote. So that's very interesting, because now Theresa May has to be scrambling because supposedly, according to media reports, this was a surprise to Theresa May and the government. But if you think about it, it actually does make sense because it's very much akin to saying, you didn't vote for it, keep voting for it until we get our outcome that we desire. That's the same thing that I've been complaining about with if this Brexit should actually go back to a second referendum to the people. No. They already voted. They voiced their opinion. They want to leave. Period. End of story. Now it's your job as the government, as their representatives, to do it. Period. End of story. You've had 2.5 going on 3 years now to get your act together. Shame on you if you didn't. If you got to make it a hard Brexit, it's a hard Brexit. But so this is interesting. What's going to happen is Theresa May going to be able to do another 11th hour and 59th minute trip back to Brussels to meet Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk of the EU to see if she can negotiate some sort of change, because you have to remember, folks, just last week we were told by the EU, this is it. You got your second chance. You are not going to get a third, so do not waste your second chance. Now it's back in the EU's court to see if they're going to stay firm on pretty much their threat to say you're not going to get a third chance. You already got the second. This is it. So I don't know what kind of maneuvering they can do, and I'm really hoping that this is not a cynical play by Theresa May and her government to keep the people inside of the EU, because you have to understand that Theresa May, along with many, many other members of Parliament and the government, are Remainers. They wanted to stay in the EU. So it's very interesting that the people who have been negotiating this Brexit is the Prime Minister who voted to remain in the EU and the EU, bureaucrats in the EU who don't want them to leave. And if they do leave, we've had this conversation many times before, they don't want them to leave peacefully and successfully, because they got to say to everybody else, look what happens if you leave. It's ugly, it's nasty, it's political, nothing gets done, your economy tanks, yada, yada, yada. So the EU does not want this to be a smooth transition, because then it's going to say to the Italians, well, we're in a recession, things aren't great, we really don't care for you guys either, see ya. They don't want that to happen, because as soon as one leaves and another leaves successfully, it's a domino effect. And I've told you guys many times before, do not be surprised if the EU and or the Euro do not exist within 5 years, especially in their current state, if not altogether. So that's another plot twist. That's very interesting, and it does make sense. So now the Prime Minister is going to be scrambling to see if she can make another deal. Otherwise, the next thing, and again, I am no expert on parliamentary tactics or British politics, but the next thing that I would suspect, if she cannot come to some other agreement, would be that her opposition is probably going to call and demand a general election or another vote of no confidence, which again will just mean it would be very interesting for another plot twist. But at the end of the day, the British people, the people of the UK, voted to leave. So that's to be the end goal. It just becomes who's the captain of the ship. And right now, it looks like it's about to hit an iceberg. So I'll keep you guys updated as we progress on that. Now, moving to some of the president's tweets this weekend. I mean, he was all over the place. I don't know if he was bored, cabin fever. I don't know what happened. But some of the things, I mean, he was all over the place. He was talking about Fox News. He was criticizing some of the hosts. He was saying, Tucker Carlson and Jeanine Pirro, they need to come back. Everything needs to be settled, and everything's fine with that. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the turmoil and some of the drama that exists around those hosts. Back and forth, obviously, some of the stuff with the Mueller investigation, and it's a witch hunt, and this, that, and the other. Okay, that's fine. I don't have any problem with the witch hunt stuff. The Fox News stuff here and there, that doesn't really bother me. What does bother me, though, was his tweets in regards to General Motors and the fact that the Lordstown plant in Ohio is officially closed, which is thousands of jobs, I believe. And obviously, it's going to be a big hit to that community. No question about it. This was announced months ago by the GM CEO, Mary Barra. And so that's no surprise. And when you listen to the Economic Podcast, you know that 7 million Americans are 90 days plus past due on their auto loans. I mean, it's the job of any CEO, any business executive to understand their business. I mean, that's just common sense. To think that the auto industry did not see this coming, I mean, they're just not that foolish. Obviously, they had their issues several years ago during the Great Recession. They got bailed out. I wasn't for it, but nevertheless, that was the thing. Here they are, and they're trying to grow their business and sustain their business, and layoffs, unfortunately, is part of the gig. And that's where we are right now. So President Trump was complaining about it. He says he called the CEO of GM, and supposedly, according to his tweets, the CEO, she blamed the local union. So then he gets off the phone, and now he's tweeting, and he's blaming the local union president for this, that, and the other. I understand the president has made campaign promises and this, that, and the other, and wants to grow the manufacturing base in this country, but he is not Caesar. This country is not ruled by a dictator. He wants the plant reopened. I understand that. I get that. I feel for the families and the people who lost those jobs. Absolutely do. But this is not a dictatorship. You know who gets on the phone and orders companies to reopen their plants, and then they actually do it? Vladimir Putin does stuff like that. Kim Jong-un of North Korea can do stuff like that. President Xi Jinping of China, he can do stuff like that. We don't do stuff like that here in this country, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to solve problems like that, and this was a great opportunity for the president to reach across the aisle to congressmen and senators from the states of Ohio and from Michigan. And there's no question that this would have been a bipartisan effort to get something resolved, or at least to get the conversation going as to how are we going to save this industry, and not just the auto manufacturing industry, but every industry. Because it's not about picking up the phone and dictating to some CEO what they must or must not do. We don't do that here. So we will never be a socialist country. Well, start with yourself, Mr. President. That's not what we do here. So get on the phone with the representatives and the senators from those respective states and say, how can we solve this? What types of policies can we put in place? How can we lower taxes further? How can we cut government spending? How can we do a whole bunch of things within the regulatory environment that stimulates economic activity? On top of that, we're at the last inning here of an economic cycle that's coming to an end. So bad timing with all of this stuff. Furthermore, some of the things that he tweeted was, GM, I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but it's sort of pathetic. We have other better car companies coming into the country, which obviously are foreign competitors. I thought he was America first. Now he's applauding foreign companies ahead of American companies. So you have to understand something too, ladies and gentlemen. The United States of America has about 330 million people in this country in a world that has several billion. I don't know what the last count is, 7 billion, something like that. It's a lot. My point is, the U.S. represents about 4% of the global population, and the rest of the population of this world is finally growing and wants things, and some of the things that they want are vehicles. So it kind of makes more sense if you have a larger population of people that want vehicles, that you move some of your plants to those countries. It just makes more sense. I mean, who wants to put them on a boat and ship them thousands of miles when you can just move the plant and build businesses there? I mean, especially when you're competing against local competition. So it just makes business sense. This should not be a surprise to anybody. Again, I understand the concern in the political campaign promises and this, that, and the other. Absolutely do. But you got to solve the structural issues. You have to strike at the root, not at the branch. You got to get rid of the income tax. You got to get rid of the Federal Reserve. You got to go through these regulations with a hacksaw. I mean, put together a commission on it. Put together a commission on all of these regulations. See how many things are redundant. See how many things are 50, 60 years old that don't even apply. But somehow, they're going to affect somebody in some lawsuit, some way, somehow. I mean, just look at these things. These are common sense solutions. But that's not what we're seeing yet here. And it gives me concern. It gives me pause. I still very much want the president to succeed. I still think he's going to win in 2020 simply because he's up against a bunch of lunatics. So as crazy as some of the people in this country are, I don't think we're all lunatics yet. There's a growing voice that we might be going in that direction, but not quite. So the president's lucky that his opponents are just terrible. They're lunatics. They're crazy. They somehow got out of the asylum. Somebody's got to, get a dog catcher and net these people and send them back because it's getting out of hand. But I just wanted to state that, and I hope a lot of you agree with me on that, because that's not what we do here. You want to bring attention to these things? That's great. But don't play it off as a tough guy, dictating to corporations how they are supposed to operate. Okay, now, just for a quick update here with last week's podcast in regards to the Department of No Justice, or the Department of Injustice, whichever one you want to play. Doesn't matter to me because it's really both one and the same. It's disgusting because we had Lisa Page, again, former attorney for the FBI, who was part of the team that looked into the Hillary Clinton email server, that whole fiasco, which, again, it continues to this day. Look up Judicial Watch. Either go online, go to their website, go to YouTube, look up Judicial Watch, look up Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch. He gives weekly updates and a whole bunch of other things. Very interesting. Can speak a lot more eloquently and articulately on this matter than I can, simply because that's what they do. They are very much at the heart of this matter. And for greater detail, go to them, because this is their wheelhouse. This is what they focus on. They're the ones who really played an integral role in finding out through a Freedom of Information Act request that was related to Libya and Benghazi that Hillary Clinton had a private email server in her private residence in New York in her bathroom. Okay? That's you or me. They lock us up, throw away the key, don't look back. Hillary Clinton, of course, in the Department of No Justice, she walks free. All right, now, some other things that I want to bring to your guys' attention. Some of you might be aware of this, others not. The Department of Justice and Hillary Clinton made a deal to look at her email servers. Okay? But, according to the deal, the FBI, the DOJ, could not look at the Clinton Foundation related emails. Could not look at the Clinton Foundation related emails. How are they supposed to know? And let me remind you that Hillary Clinton deleted 33,000 emails after receiving a subpoena. I mean, are your eyes spinning in the back of your head? Are you saying, what the is going on here? I mean, this is outrageous. This is not the United States of America. This is not justice. No way, no how. No way, no how. She deletes evidence. I guess that's okay. She makes a deal. You can look at some of the evidence, but not the other stuff that might be really incriminating just because, well, I'm Hillary Clinton and I said so. You try doing that. Pull that off and let me know how that works for you. I bet it doesn't work very well. Now, some of the other things that Lisa Page went through, and again, we looked at the testimony from, obviously, Miss Page, but from the questions from Congressman Trey Gowdy and from Congressman John Ratcliffe, and this covered the Hillary email scandal here, the investigation, and then also the Russian collusion allegations. Okay, and what was rather upsetting to me after reading this transcript and going through this testimony was that, according to Miss Page, she said the emails, the Hillary Clinton stuff was important. It was important, but it was not as important as the Russian allegations. So here we have a set of facts with a Secretary of State, not the court jester, not the town drunk, not the village idiot. The Secretary of State sets up a private server in her home, in her bathroom. She has classified information on it. This is known by the FBI. This is known by the DOJ. This is known by the Intelligence Committee Inspector General. Everybody knows this. Of course, Hillary Clinton, her excuse is, I didn't know it was classified. You believe this? How stupid do they think we are? Evidently, they think we're really stupid. And guess what? They got away with it. So maybe we are that stupid. I mean, we can talk about it, but what gets done? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And if you go back and you listen to these podcasts, you know in the transcription, the DOJ wasn't charging this woman with anything. They weren't going to charge her with jaywalking. You had Director Jim Comey come out on July 5th, threw the book at her. She is guilty. Last sentence, we're not going to charge her. Oh my goodness, she was sweating for 2 seconds. Probably not, because of course, her husband, Bill Clinton, met with the then Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, on a tarmac. I can't make this stuff up. Again, I fancy myself as creative, imaginative, but I couldn't write this crap. Not if somebody put a gun to my head and said, here, or offered me billions of dollars. I couldn't come up with this stuff. Could not come up with it. Truth is stranger than fiction. Can't come up with it. But there's nothing to see here. Bill Clinton meeting with the Attorney General is not obstruction of justice. There's nothing. No impropriety. Everything's fine. Don't look here. Take your Zoloft. Up your Prozac. Go back to sleep. Take a nap. That's what they tell us. Don't pay any attention to any of this stuff. Donald Trump can't tweet witch hunt, or Jerry Nadler goes off the reservation and says it's obstruction of justice. He can't fire Jim Comey, even though Jerry Nadler wanted him fired. It's obstruction of justice. Well within the president's authority. You can't make this stuff up. Cannot make it up. The other thing that we know, and we discussed this last week, this is ridiculous. The intelligence community, the Intelligence Community Inspector General does not have the clearance to read some of the emails on Hillary Clinton's email server. Can you believe this? That's one of the most damning pieces of testimony that exists in any of this stuff. Because she said there weren't classified information on that server. There were. Does it matter? Obviously, and you're not allowed to lie to the FBI. Did she not say that? I mean, what did she say to the FBI during their quote-unquote interview, their questioning, even though she was allowed to have everybody and their mother attend that meeting? And even that, Miss Page and the FBI were against that. But you put on the white gloves, she gets special treatment. She wants her attorney, she wants fact witnesses there to coach her to make sure she doesn't say something she shouldn't say. No, okay, it's Hillary Clinton. Let her sit here. Let these people sit here and make sure she doesn't mess up. Because evidently she doesn't know what classified information is. She's Secretary of State. The deepest secrets of this country are in her hands. I didn't know that was classified. I didn't know. And we cleaned the server, like with a rag. With a rag, we just wiped it. It was cleaned. They were bleached. 33,000 of them gone. Where are they at? Can't make it up. Cannot make it up. The other thing that comes into question is, where did all of this stuff go? Who had access to all this stuff? Who had access to all this stuff? So let's get into some of this day 2 testimony with Congressman Mark Meadows of North Carolina, and obviously with Miss Page. And again, I'm going to read this as this is written, so if there's some stuttering or pauses, different direction, it's just how it's written. Mr. Meadows, can I ask one clarifying question, Lisa? It appears, based on documents that we have, that there was a conscious decision in the mid-year investigation to go down one avenue in terms of prosecution or potential prosecution, and that is with the retention of classified information on a private server, not the disclosure of classified information. And based on the documents we have, it looks like everybody focused on the retention, but no one ever pursued the disclosure. Why was that made? And would you agree with that characterization, Miss Page? I'm not positive. That's the thing that I hesitated about, so I'm not sure that those were really activities that would have been handled at a lower level than I was involved in. These would have been the discussions. He interrupts. Right. In most of the documents, the case law that they were looking at only dealt with retention, which actually disclosure is a bigger deal from a national security threat. And yet it didn't appear that anybody looked at that based on the documents we've reviewed. So just to pause this, he makes a fantastic point, making the distinction between retention and disclosure, and then making the argument that disclosure is a bigger deal from a national security threat. I mean, you can retain the documents, even though that could be breaking statutes, depending on how you handle it. But if it's disclosed, that's the real problem, because who has it? Do the Russians have it? Do the Chinese have it? Do the Saudis have it? I don't care who has it. If it's not an American, they shouldn't have it. They shouldn't have it. So that becomes a very important question. And then you have to recall a whole bunch of people who had access to this server. Her team had it. Cheryl Mills had it. Uma Abedin, Heather Samuelson, what was his name? Brian Pagliano, I believe was his name, was the IT professional who would go back and forth. If there was a problem with the server in New York, he went up there. He went up there to take care of it. Look, the ICIG did not have the requisite clearance to look at those emails. Not all of them. Did Brian Pagliano have that type of clearance? I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. What about the other firm out in Colorado that was responsible for her technical issues? Did they have requisite clearance? I doubt it. What about Hillary Clinton's own attorneys, who she said went through all of these emails, to determine which ones the FBI got to look at. Did they have the requisite security clearance? I don't think so. I don't think so. And then again, she made a deal. They weren't allowed to look at the Clinton Foundation email. So is that really where we're supposed to go? Is that one of the rabbit holes we're supposed to go down and investigate? Was it pay for play? Was she selling this to the highest bidder? Is that why it didn't look like her server was hacked? Because it wasn't hacked. She just gave them the information. Go right in. And don't forget, Huma Abedin, her husband, Anthony Weiner, the pedophile, the sexter who likes to take pictures and send them to underage girls. Supposedly all of this stuff went on his laptop or on his computer somehow. You can't make it up. Can't make it up, but let me continue. Miss Page. So my guess, and this is, I'm speculating here just based on my knowledge of what the statutes require, is that disclosure requires intent. And so particularly when we charge disclosure cases, it's often in the context, for example, of a media leak, right? It's somebody who had possession of the information and disclosed it to somebody who was not authorized to have it. That's what those disclosure cases look like. Again, did all of those people have the requisite security clearance to look at this information? Did she give it to them? I mean, we don't know. We don't know. And she continues, and what was occurring on Secretary Clinton's server is all people who were righteously entitled to the information and who had a need to know it and were using that information in the execution of their duties. But it was occurring on a system that wasn't appropriate for it. So she even admits it was on a system that wasn't appropriate for it. And she makes the case that everybody had, how did she put this? Is all people who were righteously entitled to the information. We don't know that. Brian Pagliano was an IT guy. He's not the Secretary of State. He's not a senior aide helping her make decisions. He's an IT guy. I mean, what type of access did he have? You have to recall, he got immunity. But so did everybody else. Just breaking news, I got immunity. I think you got it too. If you were in the same state at any point in time that Hillary Clinton was as well, you got immunity. That's how this case works. This is the Department of No Justice in action. The finest minds on it. Don't worry. We've got a crack team on it. I think they are a crack team. I think they're smoking it. Now, let me continue. Mr. Meadows. And one more, and then I'll yield back. We have information from the Inspector General of the intelligence community that, I guess, initiated this entire investigation. They were the ones that came before you, that there were anomalies that would suggest that there was copies of every email going to a third party. Let me read this again. That there were anomalies that would suggest that there was copies of every email going to a third party. What's that third party, folks? He continues, and I know you heard that in the hearing the other day, but we've had substantial conversations with them. Is this news to you today, Miss Page? It is. When I heard it in the hearing, it was, maybe I had heard it one other time just with respect to like news things, but it was completely baffling to me. Mr. Meadows. Yeah, so she interrupts. I don't understand at all what that's a reference to. I do know that we gave the server. Again, I'm not a technical person, so this is going to be a little bit tortured here. But that we took exhaustive efforts to look at whether there were any intrusions, whether there was any exfiltration, Mr. Meadows. And you're saying they found none. Correct. Whether there was any exfiltration of data, and he interrupts. Well, we know that some, but it was basically in the IG's report on how that came to pass. So I guess why would the investigative team not have had multiple interviews with Mr. Rucker, who brought it to the FBI's attention originally? Because according to the IG, you never interviewed him and never interviewed them other than the initial conversation that brought it. Why would that have, and she interrupts him. So I can't speak to that because I don't know whether I'm relying on your representation that he was not interviewed, but I also don't know whether he ever came to the FBI during the pendency of the investigation and provided the allegation. If he had, he interrupts her. Well, that was the whole reason it was opened up, is my understanding was him coming. They get it. They come to the FBI, and you're saying that's not the case? Miss Page, I am really trying, Mr. Meadows, or that's not your understanding. She says, that's not my understanding. He continues, so how did this whole mid-year start if it wasn't from the... No, she says. So my understanding, and this is, I am way out on a limb here, but this is not stuff I was involved in. But by all means, please tell us what happened. But my understanding is that the ICIG did refer the existence of the server to the FBI, but that was because of the existence of classified information on that server. So there we know. There we go. We know now that there is classified information on the server. Not because of any anomalous activity, not because of potential intrusion activity, because it's not my understanding that the ICIG conducted any sort of forensic analysis like that. My understanding is that once it was made evident during the course of, I think, the FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act, production, or maybe the production to Congress, that there were some classified information which existed on a private email server, it got referred to the ICIG for those purposes, not related to intrusive activity, Mr. Meadows. So what you're telling me, it would surprise you to know today that if there were anomalies, that the Inspector General's forensic team found those before it was referred to the FBI. Let me reread this. So you're telling me it would surprise you to know today that if there were anomalies, that the Inspector General's forensic team found those before it was referred to the FBI. She says, that's correct. I'm not sure. And then he interrupts. Would that, if that is indeed the fact, would that be a major concern to you, Miss Page? It would be a concern that we didn't know that, or that that wasn't part of what they told us when they made the referral, but less so, sir, honestly, because our forensic investigators are so phenomenal that, notwithstanding whatever the ICIG may or may not have conveyed, I know we looked extensively at this question, because that was a serious question, and to the extent that a foreign government or even a criminal outlet had access to Secretary Clinton's private email server, that would have been something we cared very much about. And it's my understanding that there was no evidence that would have supported that kind of conclusion. Mr. Meadows, he says, he yields back. So here we go. Again, with the intelligence community Inspector General, they're on top of this. They know something's fishy here. There's a third copy of every email going out to a third party. Who? Who? The Russians? Bill Clinton on his laptop? Anthony Weiner? Huma Abedin? The Saudis? The Chinese? The highest bidder? Who? Who? We don't know. Are we going to know? I pray that we know. I pray that there is justice. I pray that there's justice. But we have a Department of No Justice. We have congressmen who are asking some good questions, but this was a year ago. This took place a year ago, so I don't know what they're still looking at. What's going on? Where is everything? If you followed up on a previous podcast I gave here in regards to the Clinton Foundation investigation, I mean, those financial investigators turned over their evidence to the government, to the Department of Justice, to the FBI, to the Department of Treasury back in 2017. And where does that stand? We don't know. I hope this is part of the March Madness, or at least some of the fireworks that I hope to see in the sooner rather than later future. But this is just drip, drip, drip. I want some action. I'm tired of these people. I'm tired of it. We're supposed to be draining the swamp. Doesn't look like it. Not yet, anyway. I mean, at least we're going somewhat in the right direction with some of this stuff being disclosed to us, which I think is important. But if you've been paying attention to this story and you have two brain cells to rub together, I mean, you could have figured most of this stuff out anyway. Now it's just on paper. It's black and white. Now you can read it. And again, don't just take my word for all this stuff. This stuff is available to everybody. So go out there and double check everything, and let's keep this conversation going. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you as always. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I am definitely going to continue following up with this. There's other things in this testimony that we're going to have a discussion on at some point. Maybe tomorrow we'll see what happens with the news. But this, we have Bruce Orr, we have Peter Strzok, we have a whole bunch of other people in their testimony, and there's just more and more documents that are coming out. And again, these are several hundred pages long, so it's definitely a lot of information to digest. I understand that. But this is our country. This is our republic. We have to be aware so we know what we're doing, because this is our country. So again, thank you so much for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. This is the Capitol News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.